There was once a man named David Mercer, not a name you'd find on the cover of magazines or trending on Twitter, but someone who had once stood at the top of one of the most powerful tech companies in the world, Google. David wasn't just another employee. He was a director, a leader of teams that shaped products used by millions. He had meetings with top executives, made decisions that changed user experiences, and traveled the world for conferences. His office overlooked the sprawling campus of Google's headquarters in Mountain View, California. He had it all: success, respect, and a bright future ahead. But life doesn't always follow a straight path. One day things started to go wrong, slowly at first, then all at once. David began feeling tired more often than usual. At first he blamed stress, but the fatigue didn't go away. It got worse. Then came the headaches, the dizziness, the strange numbness in his hands. After months of ignoring it, he finally went to the doctor. The diagnosis was serious, a rare neurological condition. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to disrupt everything. He needed rest, treatment, and time off work. So he took a medical leave. At first, Google supported him. His team covered for him. Colleagues sent well wishes. But the tech world moves fast. While David was recovering, projects moved forward. Without him, deadlines passed. New ideas were born. And slowly, his presence became less essential. When he finally returned, things weren't the same. His old role had been filled. His influence had faded. He was given smaller tasks, lower priority projects. The energy he once brought to the office felt dimmed by exhaustion and disappointment. He tried to push through, to regain his footing, but it was like trying to climb a mountain with no grip. Eventually he decided to leave. Not because he wanted to, but because he felt like he had no other choice. The company that had once celebrated his brilliance now barely noticed him. So he walked out the front doors of Building 43, unsure if he'd ever come back. For a while he tried consulting, then freelancing. But nothing stuck. His health still held him back. Some days he could barely get out of bed. He spent his savings on treatments, hoping for a full recovery. But as the months turned into years, he realized something painful. He was no longer part of the tech world. That identity, engineer, innovator, leader, was slipping away. So he did what many do when they hit rock bottom. He disappeared. He left San Francisco behind, left the memories of his past glory. He moved to a quieter town near San Jose, where nobody knew his name or cared about his resume. He rented a tiny room above a laundromat, slept on a thin mattress, and started looking for any job that would take him. It wasn't easy. Employers saw his background and assumed he was overqualified. Others looked at his age and hesitated. One interviewer even asked him bluntly, "Why would someone like you want this kind of job?" David didn't have a good answer. Finally, after weeks of rejection, he found work at a McDonald's near a busy freeway exit. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't exciting, but it paid the bills. Every morning he woke up before sunrise, put on his uniform, and reported to the kitchen. He flipped burgers, filled fries, cleaned tables, and smiled through the chaos of lunch rushes. Most customers never looked him in the eye. They didn't care who he was, and that was fine with him. He liked the anonymity. He didn't talk much about himself. When co-workers asked where he was from or what he did before, he gave vague answers. "Just moving around," he'd say, or "looking for something new." In truth, he was hiding, not just from the world but from himself. He missed the thrill of building something great. He missed working with smart people who dreamed big. He missed the confidence that came with knowing your value. Now he was just another face behind the counter, handing out happy meals and taking out trash bags. But he kept showing up, every day. Because sometimes, when you've lost everything, showing up is the only thing left. Then, one night, everything changed. It was a slow evening. The dinner rush had passed. Only a few customers wandered in. David was cleaning the grill when the door opened again. A man walked in wearing a simple jacket and jeans. He looked tired, like someone who had worked a long day. David barely glanced at him at first. Just another customer. But something about the way he spoke caught David's attention. "Hi there. I'll take a double cheeseburger meal, large fries, and a Diet Coke, please." David nodded and keyed in the order. As he handed over the receipt, the man smiled and said, "Thanks. Long day?" David shrugged. "You could say that." They made small talk while waiting for the food. The man asked questions, not intrusive ones, just friendly. Where was he from? Did he like working here? How long had he been in town? David answered politely but kept it short. He wasn't ready to share his whole story. Then the man picked up his tray, thanked him again, and turned to leave. But before he stepped outside, he paused. He looked back at David, and suddenly, recognition flashed across his face. "Wait a second," he murmured. David froze. The man walked back toward the counter. "I know you," he said. "I think we worked together once." David's heart sank. He forced a smile. "Yeah, maybe. It's a big world." The man studied him for a moment. Then quietly he said, "You're David Mercer, right? From Google?" David swallowed hard. He wanted to lie, to pretend he was someone else, to keep hiding. But instead, he nodded. "Yeah," he said softly. "That's me." The man stared at him for a long moment, not with pity, not with judgment, but with something else: curiosity, understanding, compassion. And then he said something David never expected. No, I remember your work. You built some amazing things." David blinked. No one had said anything like that to him in years. He didn't know what to say. The man smiled gently. "Well," he said, "good to see you again, David." Then he turned and walked out the door, leaving David standing alone behind the counter, heart pounding, mind racing, and for the first time in a long time, hope stirring. The night air was cool as Sundar Pichai stepped out of the McDonald's. He took a bite of his double cheeseburger and walked slowly toward his car. The city lights buzzed around him, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. He had just seen someone he never expected to see again. David Mercer. Sundar knew who David was. They had worked together years ago at Google. Back then, David was one of the top directors on the product team. Smart, driven, and always thinking ahead. He had helped shape some of Google's most important tools that millions of people used every day. But tonight, Sundar had found him working behind the counter at a fast food restaurant. At first, Sundar hadn't recognized him. Time had changed David. His face looked older, more tired. His eyes didn't shine like they used to, but when he spoke, Sundar knew. That voice, that calm confidence, it was unmistakable. And yet David had looked embarrassed, like he wanted to disappear. As Sundar sat in his car eating his dinner, he couldn't stop thinking about their conversation. David had been polite, sure, but there had been something else. Shame. As if he were hiding from the person he used to be. Sundar respected that. Not everyone would have kept working with the same quiet dignity, no matter where life had taken them. Still, Sundar couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. So the next day, he went back. David was surprised to see him again. "Hey," Sundar said with a smile. "Mind if I grab a coffee here?" David shrugged. "It's a McDonald's. You can sit anywhere." Sundar ordered a coffee and took a seat near the counter. David was cleaning tables, but Sundar called him over. "Can we talk for a minute?" Sundar asked gently. David hesitated. He wanted to say no, to go back to wiping tables and pretending this moment wasn't happening. But Sundar's tone wasn't pushy or nosy. It was kind. So David nodded. They sat down at a small table near the window. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Sundar broke the silence. "I know who you are," he said. "And I remember what you did at Google. You were really good." David looked away. "Thanks," he mumbled. "That was a long time ago." Sundar studied him. "What happened?" David sighed. He didn't want to get into it. But Sundar's voice was so calm, so patient, that he found himself talking anyway. "I got sick," David said. "Something neurological. Took me out for months. When I came back, everything had changed. My role was gone. People moved on. I tried to start my own company after that. Failed. Ran out of money. Had to start over." Sundar listened without interrupting. "And now?" he asked softly. David gave a half smile. "Now I flip burgers." There was silence again. Then Sundar leaned forward. "You know," he said, "life doesn't follow a straight line. Sometimes it takes detours. Sometimes it throws us off track. Doesn't mean we're broken. Just means we need to find our way back." David looked up. There was no pity in Sundar's eyes. Only understanding. "It's not that easy," David said quietly. "I've been out of the game for years. Who would even hire me now?" Sundar thought for a moment. "What if I told you there was a place for you?" he asked. David laughed nervously. "You're joking." "No," Sundar said seriously. "Google changes fast, yes, but we don't forget talent. And you? You were brilliant. Still are." David shook his head. "I don't know if I'm ready. I've been doing this for so long, I feel like I've lost touch with everything." "That's okay," Sundar said. "You don't have to jump back in tomorrow. Take your time. But don't count yourself out." David stared at the floor. He didn't know what to feel. Hope? Fear? Embarrassment? "I'll think about it," he finally said. Sundar smiled. "That's all I'm asking." Over the next few days, David couldn't stop thinking about their conversation. He kept going to work, kept flipping burgers, kept cleaning tables. But something had shifted inside him. He started wondering, was there really a way back? He remembered the things he used to love: problem-solving, building ideas, leading teams. He missed those moments, missed the excitement of creating something new. He began watching old tech talks online, reading articles about AI, machine learning, and the future of search engines. Things had changed a lot, but he could still understand them. Maybe he wasn't as far behind as he thought. One evening, after his shift, he sat outside the restaurant with his phone in hand. He almost called Sundar, but he stopped himself. What if Sundar had just been being nice? What if he had already forgotten about him? But then the next morning, his phone rang. "Unknown number." He answered. "Hi David, it's Sundar." David's heart skipped a beat. "Hey," he said. "How are you?" "I'm good," Sundar replied. "Listen, I've been thinking. If you're open to it, I'd like to set up a meeting. Just a casual chat, no pressure. We can talk about what you'd be interested in, if anything. Would that be okay?" David swallowed hard. "Yeah," he said. "That sounds great." "Perfect," Sundar said. "Let me send you the details." Later that day, David stood in front of the mirror, staring at his reflection. He saw the tired eyes, the worn-out clothes, the man who had spent years hiding from his past. But now, for the first time in a long time, he saw something else. Possibility, hope, change. He didn't know where this path would lead. He didn't know if he'd ever work at Google again. But he knew one thing. Someone had seen him, really seen him, and that was enough to start believing in himself again. David stared at his phone for a long time after Sundar hung up. He couldn't believe it. Someone from Google. Not just anyone, but Sundar Pichai, one of the most powerful people in tech, had called him personally, and he wanted to meet. David felt like he was dreaming. He kept thinking that any moment now, he'd wake up back in his tiny room above the laundromat, still working behind the counter at McDonald's with no hope in sight. But this was real. Still, doubt crept in. What if this was just kindness? What if Sundar didn't really think David could come back? What if he was just trying to be nice? He sat down on the edge of his bed, holding the phone in his hands. For years he had told himself that his old life was gone, that he had missed his chance, that he was too far behind, too broken, too forgotten. Now suddenly, someone was telling him otherwise. Could he believe it? The next few days passed slowly. Time seemed to stretch out like a long road with no end. But finally, the day of the meeting arrived. David stood in front of the mirror again, wearing the only clean shirt he owned. It wasn't fancy, but it would have to do. He took a deep breath. Then he walked out the door. Google's campus looked even bigger than he remembered. The bright glass buildings reflected the California sun. People in casual clothes and smart watches walked by, talking about code, design, and product ideas. David felt like a ghost walking through a place that no longer recognized him. He reached the lobby and checked in. A receptionist smiled and handed him a visitor badge. "Mr. Pichai will see you shortly," she said. David nodded and sat down. His heart was pounding. A few minutes later, Sundar walked in. "David," he said warmly, smiling. "Great to see you again." David stood up and shook his hand. "Thanks for having me," he said. "No problem at all," Sundar replied. "Come on, let's talk." They walked into a quiet meeting room. 2 chairs, a table, and a window that looked out over the Google campus. Sundar sat down and gestured for David to do the same. "So," Sundar began gently, "how are you feeling?" David gave a small laugh. "Honestly? Nervous. I haven't been in this kind of room in a long time." Sundar nodded. "I understand, but I want you to know something. You belong here." David looked at him, surprised. "I'm not saying this just to be nice," Sundar continued. "You built some amazing things at Google. You helped shape products that changed lives. And even though it's been a while, I still believe in you." David didn't know what to say. Sundar leaned forward. "I've already talked to a few people," he said. "We're not asking you to jump right into a big role, but there is a place for you here, if you want it." David swallowed hard. "What kind of place?" he asked quietly. "A mentorship role," Sundar said. "Helping young engineers, sharing your experience, giving advice, guiding people who are where you once were, fresh, hungry, and ready to change the world." David blinked. "You want me to teach others?" "Yes," Sundar said simply. "Because wisdom doesn't disappear just because someone takes a break. And your story? It's powerful. It can help people." David looked away for a moment. He thought about everything he had lost. The pain, the failure, the shame. The nights spent wondering if he'd ever matter again. And now, someone was offering him a second chance. "I don't know if I'm ready," David admitted. "That's okay," Sundar said. "You don't have to decide today. Take your time, think about it. Talk to people, walk around the campus, see how it feels." David nodded slowly. "Thank you," he said. "That means a lot." Over the next week, David came back to Google several times. He met with engineers, designers, and managers. Some remembered him, others didn't. But every conversation left him feeling more hopeful. He saw the way young employees looked up to people with experience. He saw how much they valued guidance. And he realized something. He still had something to offer. One afternoon, he sat with a group of interns. They were curious, asking questions about how projects used to work, how decisions were made, how to handle pressure. As he answered them, he felt something familiar return. Confidence, purpose, belief in himself. Afterward, one of the interns said, "Sir, you should really come back here. You've got so much to share." David smiled. Maybe she was right. Back at McDonald's, David worked his last shift. His co-workers were surprised when he told them he was leaving. "Where are you going?" one of them asked. David paused. Then he smiled. "Back to where I started," he said. He handed in his uniform, said goodbye to the team, took one last look at the counter where he had served thousands of customers, and then he walked out the door for the last time. The next morning, David stood outside Building 43 at Google, visitor badge in hand, heart full of hope. He stepped inside, and for the first time in years, he felt like he was home. David's first day back at Google felt like stepping into a dream. He walked through the same glass doors he had once passed through every morning, but now it felt different. This time, he wasn't hiding. He wasn't pretending to be someone else. He was returning as himself, not just the man who had built amazing products years ago, but also the man who had fallen, struggled, and fought his way back. He wore a new badge with pride. Mentor, Product Team. It wasn't a flashy title, no big office, no corner suite, but for David, it meant everything. At first it was awkward. Some people remembered him from the old days. They looked surprised to see him again. "You're back?" one engineer asked during lunch in the cafeteria. David smiled. "Yeah, I guess I am." Others didn't know who he was. To them, he was just another face in the crowd, and that was okay. Because David wasn't here to impress anyone. He was here to help. His job was simple: guide young engineers, share what he knew, and remind them that failure didn't mean the end. Sometimes it was just a detour. Every week, he met with small groups of interns and junior developers. He talked about product design, decision-making, and how to lead without authority. But more than that, he talked about life. He told them stories, not just about his success, but about his fall, about the months he spent recovering from illness, about the startup that failed, about the nights he worked at McDonald's, wondering if he'd ever matter again. And when he spoke, they listened. Not because he was famous, but because he was real. One afternoon, after a mentoring session, a young woman stayed behind. "Sir," she said, "can I ask you something?" David nodded. "Of course." She hesitated before speaking. "I've been feeling stuck lately, like I'm not good enough, like maybe I should quit." David leaned back in his chair. "I used to feel like that too," he said gently. "For a long time." She looked surprised. "But I learned something," he continued. "Feeling stuck doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're learning. Growth doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly, quietly, until one day you look back and realize how far you've come." The girl smiled, a little lighter now. "Thanks," she said. "That really helps." David nodded. "Any time." As she walked away, he felt something warm inside. This is why he came back, not for the money, not for the prestige, but for moments like this. Word about David began to spread. People started calling him the comeback mentor. Managers invited him to team meetings. Engineers asked for advice. Some even brought their friends along to hear his stories. He became a quiet legend. Not because he shouted about his past, but because he showed others that no matter how far you fell, there was always a way back. Even Sundar noticed the change. During a casual walk on campus, Sundar turned to David and said, "You know, I think you're having a bigger impact than you realize." David raised an eyebrow. "Really?" Sundar nodded. "People respect your experience. But more than that, they connect with your journey. You remind them that being human isn't a weakness. It's a strength." David smiled. "That's nice to hear." Inspired by David's return, Sundar decided to do something bold. He started a new program at Google called Second Chances. The idea was simple: find talented people who had left the company under difficult circumstances, people who had taken breaks due to health, family, or personal struggles, and give them a path back. "We lose so many great minds because life gets in the way," Sundar explained in a company-wide meeting. "But talent doesn't disappear just because someone takes a break. Sometimes all they need is a chance." The response was overwhelming. Former employees reached out. HR created a special team to support reintegration. Engineers volunteered to help train returning staff. The program became more than just a policy. It became part of Google's culture. And at the heart of it all was David. He helped shape the program, gave feedback on interviews, even led welcome sessions for new returnees. To them, he wasn't just a mentor, he was proof that it could work. Months passed. David still didn't have a fancy office, still didn't wear a suit every day, still preferred hoodies and jeans, but something had changed. He stood taller, spoke with more confidence, laughed more often. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was thriving. And the best part? He never forgot where he came from. Sometimes, after a long day, he would walk past a McDonald's near the freeway and smile. Not with shame, but with gratitude, because that place hadn't just given him a paycheck. It had reminded him of who he was when no one was watching, and that made all the difference. Years passed. David Mercer was no longer the man who flipped burgers at McDonald's, but he never forgot that part of his life. In fact, he carried it with him like a badge of honor. At Google, he had become more than just a mentor. He was now a symbol, a living example of what it meant to rise after falling, to believe in yourself when the world seemed to forget you, and to find purpose not just in success, but in helping others find theirs. His journey touched people, far beyond the walls of Building 43. Engineers who once felt lost came to him for advice. Some had struggled with burnout. Others had taken breaks due to health or family reasons and feared they'd fallen too far behind. David always listened, always shared his story, and always reminded them, "You're not broken. You're just delayed." Over time, the Second Chances program he helped build became one of the most respected initiatives inside Google. Other tech companies started copying it. Microsoft, Amazon, even startups began creating similar paths for professionals who wanted to return after difficult times. What Sundar had started as an act of kindness turned into a movement. And David? He became its quiet hero. One day, Sundar stood on stage during a company-wide event. The auditorium was full of employees, new hires, and even a few reporters. He looked out at the crowd and smiled. Then he said something that made everyone turn their heads. "I want to tell you a story," Sundar began. "It's not about code or AI or product design. It's about a person who once sat where many of you sit now, who built great things, faced hard times, and disappeared from our world." The room grew silent. But then, Sundar continued, "He came back. Not because he demanded a comeback, not because he begged for another chance, but because someone saw his value, even when he couldn't see it himself." Sundar paused. "That person is sitting right here among us." He pointed toward the front row. David, surprised, gave a small wave. Applause broke out. Some people stood up. Others clapped harder. David felt his eyes well up. He didn't expect this, but Sundar wasn't done. "This story," Sundar said, "is why we created the Second Chances program. Because talent doesn't disappear just because life gets in the way, and because compassion can change everything." He looked directly at David. "Thank you, David, for reminding us of who we are, not just as a company, but as human beings." More applause. This time, louder. David stood up slowly and bowed his head. "Thank you," he said softly. "I'm just glad I could help." From that moment on, David's name was spoken with respect across the company. He wasn't famous. Like Sundar, he didn't run billion-dollar teams or appear on magazine covers, but he mattered. To the young intern who stayed late asking questions, to the mother returning to work after years at home, to the developer who almost quit, until he heard David's story. They all found strength in his journey. And that, David realized, was his true legacy. Not the products he had built, not the titles he had held, but the lives he had touched. Outside Google, David's story began to spread. A reporter from Wired magazine wrote an article titled, "How a Former Director Found Redemption at McDonald's and Changed Google Forever." Another piece appeared in Forbes, "Why This Man is Tech's Most Unexpected Hero." Podcasts interviewed him. Universities invited him to speak. People reached out to him online. Many were curious. Some asked for advice. Others just thanked him. "You gave me hope," one message read. "Your story made me keep going," said another. David replied to as many as he could, not with speeches or lectures, just simple, honest words. He told them what Sundar once told him. Life doesn't follow a straight line. Sometimes it takes detours. Sometimes it throws us off track. Doesn't mean we're broken. Just means we need to find our way back. One cold morning, David stood outside the same McDonald's, where his journey had changed forever. He wasn't there to work. He was there to give thanks. He walked inside and ordered a coffee. The young cashier smiled politely. David looked around. Same tables, same chairs, same smell of fries in the air. But now everything felt different because this place hadn't been the end of his story. It had been the turning point. Without this job, without the shame, without the struggle, he might never have come back. He finished his coffee, left a generous tip, and stepped outside. The sun was rising. So was he. Today, David still works at Google. Not as a director, not as a star engineer, but as a mentor, guide, and friend to many. He walks the halls with a smile. He listens. He teaches. He inspires. And every time someone says, "I feel like I've failed," he tells them his story, not to impress, but to remind them, no matter how far you fall, there's always a way back. All you need is one person to believe in you. Sometimes even yourself. And sometimes, that's enough to change everything.